Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Myth. So, taking on a fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday because pretty much everyone was asking me after I did my RetroTink 4K reviews and videos to take a look at the Morph 4K from PixelFX. So they sent one over for review with no existing conditions whatsoever. I can say anything I want about the product. So we're going to go through the overall form factor, what it offers as far as inputs at this point in time, what it'll offer in the future, get some game capture, and really talk about what the Morph 4K is, who it's for, and whether or not I think you should add it to your mix. I will say at least the logo makes some very fun camera fades as far as the focus is concerned. But this is a very interesting product because right now this is basically its first evolution. Think of it like a Pokemon. This is going to evolve and you're going to be able to add different analog bridges in the back later on down the line. So the Morph 4K is kind of what you make of it. Right now, I'm basically focusing on Direct Video Mode on MiSTer FPGA, kind of giving the best use case scenario for a 4K scaler with just an HDMI input. But as far as the overall Morph is concerned, if you've used one scaler, you've used them all form factor wise. It's got a nice case, some good switches, some buttons, basically everything you would possibly need to control this thing. And I do like that it does have tactile buttons on the case in and of itself, so if you don't want to use the remote, or if you're like me and you left the remote 2 rooms away because you can't leave anything in the same place, these buttons definitely can be useful, and you'll see there is a micro SD card slot as well. But the tactile buttons are a definite plus for me. I came from Framemeister territory where you could use a remote, but you could do pretty much everything on the scaler in and of itself as well, so this is a nice bonus. But the real interesting thing is going to be what's around the back. There's an HDMI in, an HDMI out, and an auxiliary USB port, which at this point in time at least is not used, along with USB-C power. You want about a 1.5 amp on that from what they've said on their documentation. But so far, playing around with the Morph 4K in Direct Video Mode 1 on MiSTer using the HDMI in has been very painless and for the most part very impressive as well. Any other consoles that you've modified for HDMI out are going to just inject into the back of the Morph 4K and you're going to be off to the races. We just need to wait and see when that analog bridge comes out because I am very curious about that. But if you're looking for another scaler to use with your MiSTer FPGA to take that direct video out and go into a 4K scaler, the Morph is going to be a really nice option for you. We already did the video on the RetroTink 4K and how that works in Direct Video Mode 1 as well, which is spectacular. So if you want to compare and contrast, go ahead and watch that video and you'll get a good sense of what these things are actually doing when it comes to direct video. Just be aware that direct video does require a little bit of articulation of the INI file, and I know most of you are probably MiSTer watchers, so definitely make sure you do that. But interestingly enough, this can actually work as a chain of scalers. I could take something like my Framemeister here and go ahead and use the analog ins on that, the HDMI out into the PixelFX, and then basically complete my 4K scale. Now, depending on the scaler you're using, Framemeister, OSSC, or otherwise, do be aware that chaining these scalers in is going to combine their latencies. Whatever latency my Framemeister may have is going to go into the PixelFX as well. And I have played around with this a little bit in the background. I'm not quite ready to do a video yet, and if you want to see that, leave me a comment down below. But I will say on the arcade board side of things, my Framemeister going to the PixelFX did work, and I didn't really notice any sort of latency that was affecting my gameplay whatsoever. So if you're looking for a scaler just to complete the 4K scale for the least amount of money, the Morph 4K definitely is an option for you. Now, I know a lot of people like to know about the case designs. I would give the plastics on this a 7 out of 10. They're a little bit clicky, but honestly that doesn't so much matter. But on the back side of things, outside of having the QR code to get to the manual, I do like that they have these screw hold mounts here. You could actually mount this to a wall on the side of your desk, whatever you want. It's a small touch, but it's definitely going to be a useful one in some people's setup. So if you want to just hang your Morph 4K from the wall, you can do that. Now, it does come with a controller and it is relatively decent. This is definitely being pivoted from something else. It doesn't seem like a bespoke controller for the Morph 4K, and interestingly enough, this did actually turn on my air conditioner as well. Seems like it shares a signal with that, but that's not weird. In the Morph 4K, so many controllers control so many things. Just a fun little aside. I will say, compared to the RetroTink 4K controller though, you're going to be spending more time just using the navigation buttons and going into the menu on the Morph 4K. But honestly, the menu is very comprehensive. It's very easy and intuitive to navigate, so I don't mind that too much whatsoever. Honestly, the controller kind of gets you in there, and a lot of the settings are articulated in the sub menus, which is totally fine in my opinion. I like the design of the menus as well. This is definitely a work in progress product though. I updated this to the most recent firmware, and the team at PixelFX definitely seem like they have more things coming down the line. But honestly, that analog bridge I am very curious about. but tell me down below, are you the type of person that's just using HDMI into a 4K scaler, or are you putting a lot of different analog inputs as well? For me, honestly, outside of MiSTer Direct Video Mode, all of my scaling usually involves retro consoles or arcade boards, so I do want to get an analog signal into the Morph 4K natively with their bridge. Because obviously something like Dreamcast, if you have the digital HDMI mod in there, you're totally going to be fine. You don't need anything else. But if you want to use a VGA box, sure, you could go VGA to HDMI and that would work. But if you want to do native VGA, you just can't do that quite yet on the Morph 4K, but it is in the product pipeline. Now, I will say I do absolutely love having Wi-Fi built into the Morph 4K as far as the update process is concerned. You can definitely tell, at least on the menu side of things, they spent a lot of time trying to get this to work as painlessly as possible. And in my first time trying to update this, it was just exactly that. You get some QR codes, you use your phone, you connect to your Wi-Fi, and then basically enter in a few passwords so that this is now connected to your router or however else you access the internet. And next time you want to upgrade the firmware, you just go into the menu. It's going to use your Wi-Fi to see whether or not there's an update, and it's going to take care of everything in the background. It is a small touch, but as a quality of life improvement, it totally is a nice feature. Not like manually installing firmware is the hardest thing in the world, honestly. I'm sure if you own a scaler, you're more than comfortable doing something like that, but this is a nice little touch, and something I appreciate about PixelFX having these Wi-Fi updates just removes one step from the overall chain, and that is always nice. And then you can just pop right in over Wi-Fi and update your firmware. And I promise I'm getting to the scaling and all of the different effects in just a moment, but I kind of want to go through the overall user experience of dealing with something like the Morph 4K, the menu system, and just how it kind of operates within your gaming ecosphere, because I know people are curious about that. Now, we're going right into Super Mario 64, just a game that I always love checking out. The colors, the overall screen cadence. Been talking about Nintendo 64 a lot on the channel right now. We did have to do some scaling, obviously. But I will say bringing the image to 4K looks extremely nice on the entirety of the Nintendo 64 side, so long as you're dealing with 240p footage. There's so many different options within the Morph 4K. You have different scaler options here. You can go through all of the data, articulate it however you want. For the most part, it gets pretty close, but you're definitely going to need to manually adjust some things. And do be aware that Direct Video Mode on MiSTer FPGA, while extremely good, is still something that every once in a while you're going to need to fiddle around with to make sure you get the image you want out of it. This is not like plugging a console into the back of the Morph 4K. MiSTer is incredible, but it is more of a hands-on experience. You can do all sorts of different shifts and crops on your image to make sure that everything is where you need it to be. So just like the RetroTink 4K, there's a ton of granularity in as far as what you want to do and how you want to do it. And we'll get to these mask and scan lines in just a moment, but you can adjust the gamma because I felt like maybe it was a tiny bit too bright there at the beginning. But of course we have presets. I'm just showing you what is on the actual Morph 4K in and of itself. If you want to add or create new ones, you totally can do that and save them to the micro SD card slot and the micro SD card in the front of the Morph 4K in and of itself. But I will say, aperture grill wise, they look really nice, just never really been my cup of tea as far as a filter is concerned. I'm more of a no filtration or scan lines only sort of fan here, so we'll definitely get to scan lines in just a bit. But even with the aperture grill here on Super Mario 64, it's giving me a very nice image. It's cooperating with my MiSTer FPGA and Direct Video Mode, so honestly I have no complaints as far as that is concerned. And you'll see here we have so many different things we can do to it, and this will just expand and grow over time. We have all of the horizontal scan lines, all of the vertical scan lines, the different masks, and the gamma adjust, so you can just basically dial in whatever looks right to you. And I'm going to say the same thing in this video that I say in every single video. There is no right option as far as these filters and effects are concerned. If you like what you see, that means it is correct for you. If you don't like what you see, change it around until you're happy. There is no one quote-unquote right setting to use here. Whatever image you like is the one that you should be using. And sometimes if I do add some of those scan lines, I will adjust the gamma every once in a while just to boost it up by 1 to get a little bit more brightness in the image. It's just kind of how I prefer it. But scan lines on Super Mario 64 on MiSTer FPGA on the Morph 4K is a very good looking image. I would play this any day of the week and be totally happy. Now on the items that definitely need work, the motion deadaptive interlacing, and any of the deinterlacing in general. Playing Virtua Fighter 2 here, a high-resolution 480i game on Sega Saturn, I just was not able to find any particular setting that would keep the screen from jumping around on me. Now, all of the Saturn's resolution changes were extremely fast and never once threw the scaler, so high marks on that. But as far as the actual deinterlacing is concerned, I just think it needs a few more updates here. If you go from motion deadaptive to some other options, you're going to see it jump more or less, but nothing I did was able to basically keep that jumping down to an extreme minimum where it didn't become noticeable to me. But that's the good thing about scalers, they can be updated, and I'm sure this will be worked on in the future to get us a little bit closer to where we might want to be. I would say Bob deinterlacing is probably the least jumpy on the Sega Saturn side of things, and that's always a good thing. But let's move over to the arcade side with Street Fighter Alpha 3. It's my favorite Street Fighter of all time in the Alpha series. I know a lot of people prefer it too, but I'm a bigger fan of 3. And we do have scan lines on for the intro here. And as far as the latency is concerned, on the Morph 4K, I have had absolutely no issues with it whatsoever. I will probably run a second part of this with a lot more empirical evidence, but part 1 is kind of just the overall look, feel, vibe, and use case scenario of what this thing may do. So as we get into this match here, I have turned scan lines off, and I want to talk about how quick it is to turn them on, and RGB limited versus full mode, and how that can kind of articulate some of the colors that you're going to see on screen. But as far as actually controlling this game on my MiSTer FPGA and getting a responsive control scheme out of the Morph 4K, zero problems whatsoever. You don't need to worry about that. This is definitely going to not affect your gaming whatsoever. If you don't do well, it is on you. But take a look here at the RGB limited, and then I move it over to RGB full. This kind of saturates the colors a little bit more, and for me it is the more attractive look when we're talking about just this one use case scenario. But keep that in mind, that is an option you can articulate, and there is a manual online showing you exactly what every single option does. I'm not going to go over stuff like BFI in this video, not really what I think my audience is super interested in. But I will say here, if I want to turn the scan lines on, the menu is informative, it's intuitive, and you can pop them on in between matches, get out of the menu, and be right back to controlling before anything does start. So I do love just how quick the menu is, how good the remote is on the response system wise, and honestly how quickly I can get back into game and still enjoy some setting changes. The only thing, like I said, it turns on my air conditioner. I actually find that quite hilarious. Now, one feature that just does not exist in the Morph 4K, and I absolutely wish it did, and I'm sure it can with new firmware updates, is that if there's any vertical or tate game on the arcade side of things or on any sort of system, it's not going to be able to be rotated by the Morph 4K. The RetroTink 4K has the rotate mode. It does take a little bit of dialing in to get perfect, but you can change the image rotationally to make sure that you're actually playing a tate game correctly. And if you see that I'm dying a lot here very quickly, that's because I'm trying to turn my head sideways when I play this. So hopefully the Morph 4K gets a rotation mode. That would be another huge benefit. But so far I am quite enjoying this product. It is slightly confusing at this point in time who it is for with just the HDMI in, and once those analog bridges come out, I'm definitely going to test those as well because I am curious about that. But at the price point that the Morph 4K is asking for, it is a very interesting option. I do want to see some improvements to the overall deinterlacing algorithms and how they're performing on the device, because on the interlace side of things, it might not quite be ready for prime time yet. But as far as 240p in over direct video on MiSTer FPGA into the Morph, this is a very impressive sight to see, and I think it is a really fun scaler in its current iteration. But a lot of what PixelFX and the Morph 4K are future-proof, quote-unquote, and there's going to be a lot of options to add into the back, so I can't wait to see what those are. But those are my initial impressions and my initial review of the Morph 4K. It's a very interesting product. It does a lot of things right, and it could use a few updates on some of the other things. Short of that, if you have any questions, leave them down below. I'll definitely follow up this video when the analog comes out, but we're done. Bye-bye.